Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is one of those lines that doubles as a diagnosis. Short, blunt, and if you've ever sat in a meeting or navigated an institution of any kind, instantly recognizable. The most dangerous phrase in the language is, "We've always done it that way." That's Grace Hopper, Rear Admiral, U.S. Navy, and one of the most consequential figures in the history of computing. She was a mathematician with a doctorate from Yale who joined the Navy during World War II and ended up programming the Harvard Mark I, one of the earliest large-scale digital computers. She went on to develop the first compiler, the software that translates human-readable code into machine language, a breakthrough that made programming accessible to people who didn't speak pure machine code. She was a primary architect of COBOL, the programming language that for decades ran the business and government computing infrastructure of the world. When she finally retired from the Navy in 1986, she was 79 years old and the oldest active duty officer in the United States military. She kept a clock on her wall that ran counterclockwise, deliberately, to remind anyone who walked into her office that just because something has always been done one way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. The quote first appeared in a 1976 Computer World interview. She repeated versions of it throughout her career, sometimes calling the phrase most dangerous, sometimes most damaging. The specific wording varied. The conviction never did. So, why dangerous? That's the word worth considering. Not wrong, not counterproductive, not even just unhelpful, dangerous. Hopper chose that word deliberately, and in the context of her work, it made complete sense. She operated in a field moving so fast that clinging to yesterday's methods didn't just slow you down. It could cause real harm. Systems that weren't updated failed. Decisions made on outdated assumptions produced cascading errors. In computing, the cost of institutional inertia was measurable and sometimes catastrophic. But the insight extends well beyond technology. Because the phrase, "we've always done it that way," doesn't just describe a method, it describes a posture. It's a way of shutting down inquiry before it starts, of treating the past as a final authority on what the future should look like. And that posture shows up everywhere, in organizations, in families, in relationships, in the way individuals make decisions about their own lives. The danger isn't the phrase itself. The danger is what it replaces. When someone says, "we've always done it that way," what they're not saying is, "does this still work? Is this still the best approach? Has anything changed that would make a different method more effective?" Those are the questions that produce growth. "We've always done it that way," forecloses them. And here's the thing. It usually isn't coming from malice. Most people who say it aren't trying to obstruct progress. They're doing something deeply human, seeking the comfort of the familiar, reducing uncertainty, avoiding the cognitive load of re-examining something that feels settled. Hopper herself acknowledged this. "Humans are allergic to change," she said. "Not stupid, not malicious, allergic. It's a reaction, not a choice." Which is exactly why it has to be named and resisted rather than simply criticized. There is also a more sophisticated version of this problem that's worth naming. The one that doesn't announce itself as tradition, but disguises itself as expertise. The person who has been doing something a certain way for 20 years and has enough experience to defend that way with genuine intelligence. They're not saying "we've always done it that way" out loud, but that's what's operating underneath. Deep experience can be a tremendous asset. It can also calcify into a ceiling where the very knowledge that made someone valuable starts preventing them from seeing what's changed. We talked when we looked at Heraclitus about the idea that you can never step into the same river twice, that everything is in motion, including the situations we think we understand. The danger of "we've always done it that way" is precisely that it assumes the river has stayed still. It treats a dynamic, changing situation as if it were fixed, and then it acts accordingly, which is how institutions fall behind, how relationships stagnate, and how individuals stop growing while convincing themselves they're simply being consistent. Now, the honest counterpoint, because this show doesn't skip that part. Not every tradition is inertia. Not every "we've always done it that way" is a red flag. Some things have been done a certain way for a long time because that way works, because it was hard-won, because it encodes lessons that aren't always visible on the surface. The danger Hopper is naming isn't continuity, it's unexamined continuity. The difference is whether the question has been asked. If you have genuinely evaluated an approach, considered alternatives, and concluded that the existing method is still the best one, that's not dangerous. That's disciplined. The phrase only becomes dangerous when it substitutes for the evaluation rather than following from it. Dick Winters understood this intuitively. His whole philosophy of leadership was built on investing in preparation so that his people could adapt when circumstances changed. The soldiers who couldn't adapt because they were locked into a single method of doing things were the ones who became liabilities under pressure. Flexibility wasn't optional in his world. It was survival. Hopper's counterclockwise clock is the perfect symbol for what she was advocating. She wasn't saying throw everything out. She was saying question the default. Ask why. Make sure the direction you're traveling is a choice and not just a habit. That applies to every scale. The organization that hasn't revisited its core processes in a decade, the team that has a way of doing things because that's how the previous team did them, and nobody remembers why. The individual who has been approaching a recurring problem the same way for years and keeps getting the same unsatisfying result. Rita Mae Brown put it plainly. A mistake repeated more than once is a choice. Hopper is making the organizational equivalent of that argument. A method repeated without examination is eventually just inertia, pretending to be judgment. So here's the question worth bringing into your own life today. Where are you doing something because it's always been done that way, and you've never actually asked whether it still makes sense? It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be a process, a habit, a relationship dynamic, a belief you inherited rather than chose. Just ask the question. That's all Hopper was ever asking for. Not revolution. Just a willingness to look. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think of something in your own life that's overdue for a second look, that's exactly the point. Because wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. I hope you'll join me in the next episode.